I really failed, and I really did not do as well as I was hoping to. And that was the best experience I've ever had about being a leader, because I cared about what I was doing, and I knew that I had the knowledge in my head to do well, but for some reason it was lost in translation. So I had to learn to not rely on what I knew about myself and not rely on the lessons that I've learned, and instead start to learn new ones and start to trust others, which is a huge deal, and their guidance and their wisdom.
Everyone has a story to tell.
Stories of hardship, stories of hope,
stories of doubt, stories of faith.
But no matter the story,
these diverse experiences of military life
can all be found at the intersection of faith, family, and profession.
This is OCF Crosspoint.
So this episode marks the end of Season 2 of OCF Crosspoint. And before I share my interview with Ensign Nelson Chiaravallotti, United States Navy, I want to say thank you to each of you listening right now, whether you are tuning in for the first time or you're a longtime listener. And if you haven't heard each episode this season, I definitely suggest going back and catching up on some of the amazing stories we've had in Season 2. I also want to say thank you to all of my guests this season. There have been some really fantastic stories, and I appreciate the willingness of each guest to share some deep and personal parts of their life stories. And I'm curious, was there an episode that really stood out to you this season? Maybe one that you could relate to on some level or that had some other significance? If so, I'd really like to hear from you. Share your favorite episode with me at podcast@ocfusa.org. As we head into the break between podcast seasons and start working on interviews for Season 3 in April, I could really use your help in a few ways. First, I always end each episode with this statement, but I'll share it here at the beginning. If you have an idea for a guest, topic, or story that should be considered for the podcast, send an email to me and let me know. At least a couple episodes in Season 2 happened as a result of listeners like you reaching out to me with ideas, and I greatly appreciate it. Next, if you think OCF Crosspoint is a valuable resource, would you consider leaving a review for the show wherever you listen to podcasts? And would you also tell someone else about this podcast? We found that word-of-mouth advertising is extremely helpful in getting the word out to others about the show. And finally, since this podcast is a resource of Officers Christian Fellowship, I encourage you to find out more about OCF if you haven't heard of our ministry. Otherwise, take a look at the website for ways to get involved in OCF, for additional resources to help you integrate your spiritual calling and your military calling. And with winter approaching, check out the holiday programs at our two conference centers, Spring Canyon and White Sulphur Springs. I'll be sure to put links to everything I just talked about in the show notes. Okay, thanks for bearing with me through all of that. Let's just jump straight into my conversation with Ensign Nelson Chiaravallotti, United States Navy, as he shares his story of military life at the intersection of faith, family, and profession. All right, so let's get started by, first of all, Nelson Chiaravallotti. Did I pronounce that last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, well, I have to ask, with arguably an unusual last name like that, what have been some of the more unique pronunciations of your last name that you recall in your lifetime?
I've heard many pronunciations of it. A lot of the times people just kind of give up halfway through. For example, whenever they're calling roll or trying to say my name, if I see them struggling, I'll tell them, like, hey, just don't hurt yourself. But, you know, I've heard Chiaravallotti. I've heard just ravioli in general. Chia, what in the world is this? I also answered to long last name, CH14, you name it. There's
Nice.
Yeah, it gets pretty crazy, but it's how you can tell, like, who's a telemarketer or not whenever they call.
Well, Nelson, let's talk about your path to the military. When did you first feel called to serve, and why the Navy?
So I grew up in a Navy household. Both parents served. My mom was a Navy nurse and did OCS, and my father originally was a Marine and then transferred to Navy OCS, unfortunately, after an injury. But, you know, we're thankful for it now, obviously. Ever since then, I've been around the Navy, and a big part of it was seeing the examples that my parents both gave me. My dad especially, I'm very similar to him in general in a lot of ways. I really looked up to him. He would bring his friends over, and my mom would bring her friends over, and I'd see these characters of these people and their faith and just how strong they were, especially their leadership. And as a young kid and being the youngest one in the family, I was mostly just kind of there to, I guess, observe a lot of the time. And that was a huge part of it. And I was super thankful just to see the role models and the examples that I had in my life, because they gave me something to look forward to and gave me something to look at and go, like, I really want to be like them. And it got to the point where, like, when I was younger, I'd see any sailor, soldier, airman, Marine in uniform, and to me, it was like I saw Superman. And in high school, I decided to follow my dad's footsteps and become fire rescue, become EMS. And I was working towards my EMT license and firefighter, but didn't quite get there. But I was still responding to calls and still being a first responder. And that definitely sealed the deal for me. I was by myself. My parents weren't there anymore. My friends weren't there. And I was by myself in a stressful situation. And all of the lessons and all of the things my dad and my mom and their friends were telling me, I could see unfold before my eyes, about good leadership and what it's like to be in a stressful situation. And ever since then, it was just a done deal that I knew I was going to be in the Navy, and I wanted to be an officer and lead. So I applied for the 4-year scholarship for the ROTC program, and I was very thankful. I got it and got sent down to A&M Galveston for that. And ever since then, the Navy has been what I've wanted to do. I now have since commissioned and am now an ensign, and I'm waiting to get sent to Charleston, South Carolina for nuclear power school, because I was drafted into the submarine force. But even then, I'm still excited for it and looking forward to what God has to give me and what the path that's going to take me down.
Let's talk about your time at Texas A&M Galveston. What sorts of experiences did you have during your time at A&M that helped shape you into the leader that you are now, or at least put you on the path to being the leader that you hope one day to be?
Sure, absolutely. Since freshman year, I made an effort to be as involved as I possibly could. And that was because, my dad told me, and the great quote that I still live to this day by is, experience is what you get right after you needed it. I didn't realize how true that was until I got to college and started going through those experiences. The biggest one actually was a pretty minor role in the grand scheme of things. But for me personally, I think it's the one that really jump-started my leadership experience. And it happened during my freshman year. I was the guidon for my company for the Court of Cadets, but for the ROTC chain of command, in the spring, I became the PT officer, which isn't an unusual thing that happens. And the reason behind it was I've always wanted to pursue special warfare in the Navy, and my PT scores didn't hide that. So the staff saw that and decided that they'd want to give it a shot and see how this freshman could do. Since then, it hasn't happened again. So that's how it went. And I really failed, and I really did not do as well as I was hoping to. And that was the best experience I've ever had about being a leader, because I cared about what I was doing, and I knew that I had the knowledge in my head to do well, but for some reason it was lost in translation. So I had to learn to not rely on what I knew about myself and not rely on the lessons that I've learned, and instead start to learn new ones and start to trust others, which is a huge deal, and their guidance and their wisdom. And it was pretty tough though at times, because like I said before, I cared about this, and this is something that was important to me, was physical fitness and the people getting the workouts. If they're waking up at 5 o'clock in the mornings to go work out, I didn't want to waste their time. But for the first couple months, and even up until the end really of that semester, I essentially was, because I was putting too much pressure on myself and not explaining myself well enough. Just really general universal leadership lessons that you learn. I decided early on, I'm not going to give up, and I'm not going to let the complaints get to me. And, I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to absolutely adhere to all the ones that I think were solid and based on good examples. But the biggest thing that I worked on that semester was owning my responsibility and owning my mistakes. Following that, I'd say the next biggest experience that I had was my junior year. And that was when, in the Corps of Cadets, I was a company commander. So I was in charge of about 50 cadets, and not all of them were going to ROTC. I went to Texas A&M University of Galveston, which is a maritime academy. So a lot of them were licensed option cadets. But being a company commander, I was also an RA at the same time, because that's how the dorms work down here. is I had full responsibility with them, and their well-being was dependent on me. And that was something totally new and totally that I wasn't used to. One of the experiences that I think really shaped my experience during that time was one of my freshmen, who was also an ROTC, he had a heart condition, and we didn't know about it at the time, but he started having palpitations. So he went to the hospital. I wasn't aware of this until about an hour later, but one of the freshmen texted me and said, "Hey, Mr. Chiaravallotti, just to let you know, this freshman is in the hospital, and he is in one of the floors, which is with a cardiac floor." And I immediately asked him what floor, what unit, and what hospital he was at. I felt a great sense of more like, not desperation, but of helplessness, because I knew that I couldn't do anything for him, but I knew that what I could do for him was encourage him, and what I could do for him was at least be there for him. And being that helpless role, I knew that there was more purpose than I originally saw. So the whole company poured out, and we showed up to the hospital that night. And I remember sitting in the room, and it was during the World Series against Houston with the Nationals. And me being from DC, my freshmen were not very happy with me after that game. But we were in the hospital room and hanging out. I was working on homework, they all were. And I remember looking around, and I stopped for a second, and they were all joking, and they were having a good time. And the freshman who was in the bed, he, although scared, was smiling. In that moment, I knew this is what it's all about, and this is what really matters at the end of the time. And that helpless feeling that I had, what I thought was helpless, was totally defunct. Because even as my time as EMS, I knew, and I learned this, that the person's mindset does matter. And if they're willing to fight, in their mind, they are ready to go. Their body is going to respond to that well. And that's what I saw here. So that night, me and only a choice couple of freshmen, maybe about 5 or 6 of them, actually spent the night on the floor in the hospital. And of course, being the one in charge, I made sure all of them had beds and couches, and I stole so many chairs from the nurses that I think they caught on the next night. But we did it again. And for as long as he was in the hospital, as long as we were able to, we spent the night with him, and we encouraged him. And that was something that I will never be able to forget, because it wasn't just me, and it was nothing that I was doing. It was just something that God had given us, and that was that community of his company, really. And the biggest thing I could say to anyone who is just getting into school or getting into any sort of experience is, when you are in a situation, even if you can't see it, there are so many advantages to being there. And as a Christian, especially, who, we were supposed to be more like Christ and be sanctified in all that we do, we have so many opportunities to do that. So take full advantage of what your opportunity has to offer, even if it's 1 or 2 things. Don't toss them to the side and think that it's not purposeful enough, or I see I can do this task, but it's not going to be that impactful, because you really never know. So if you are in an opportunity that you can see any sort of purpose or any sort of opportunity, wring it dry. Like, wring all that you can out of it, because you will be so thankful for it at the end of your day. And even then, someone else might be so thankful for it.
Yeah, and hearing you give your answer, Nelson, encouragement is definitely one of the big themes I would take out of that response you just gave. Also, you talked about adversity, and you talked about perseverance, and I want to drill down on that one a little bit more. How would you define perseverance? And I'm not necessarily looking for a textbook definition of the word, but just maybe in your experience, just what are some thoughts that come to mind that describe perseverance?
So perseverance is something that I think is essential to the Christian walk. And because of that, I would say you need the Bible to define that. So to define perseverance, I would say the definition is an enduring and faithful pursuit in the face of affliction. Now, in Revelation 2, Jesus is writing letters to the churches, the 7 churches. And in Revelation 2, verses 2, is writing to the letter to the church of Ephesus, and he's saying, I know your works, your labor, and your endurance, and that you cannot tolerate evil. And then if you look at Revelation 2, verses 10, it says, don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison to test you, and you will have affliction for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. And obviously we see affliction there. And in 2:9, the same exact passage, it says, I know your affliction and poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but they are a synagogue of Satan. So in all of these passages, we're seeing that the perseverance, the endurance, the faithful endurance that these Christians have, that Jesus sees it, and he's saying, you are not working for nothing. You are not working for naught. You are working for the crown that awaits you. And then in 1 Thessalonians, it's referencing the pursuit. And Paul is writing about what it means to pursue godliness and to pursue Christ. And it says in 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 15, see to it that no one repays evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good for one another and for all.
Yeah, that's a really good definition. And based on how you're defining or describing perseverance, that pursuit in the face of affliction, would you say there have been some points in your life or during your time at Texas A&M where you had to live that out? And I know you briefly touched on it your freshman year. You talked about failing, but it was the best experience that you've ever had and that you're not going to give up and that sort of thing. But what are some other instances where perseverance, as you've defined it, specifically, you had to live that out? You had to endure that and go through that?
Yeah, there have been so many, too many to count. But if I had to pick one, the first one to go into, as mentioned before, I'd always wanted to be in the military. And it's still the deal really in high school, right before I started the application for the ROTC and for Navy. And when I got accepted and got the scholarship, I was also given another email by DODMERB, who I'm sure many of you are well acquainted with if you're listening to this. DODMERB is the medical review board, and they give you the physical qualification, physical clearance to be in the military. And the letter said, hey, Midshipman Chiaravallotti, we found out that you have this, this, and this on your medical record, and we are going to disqualify you from joining. We saw this coming. I mean, we were aware of these diagnoses that I had, but we're actively working on getting them cleared since they were misdiagnoses. But DODMERB, not being me, and I'm not blaming them, they didn't believe me. So for the first year of my college experience, the whole time I was fighting DODMERB, and we would send in our rebuttal every time, and with evidence from my doctor and from the test saying, here is what it is saying. This number popped up in this test. However, it means this. It doesn't mean what you think it means. But every single time we get denied, and it ended up getting denied 5 times total. And each time we got denied, it was a crushing defeat, because not only would all of that effort that I put into that submission, not only would that have gone defunct, but then I had to find more. And then I had to wait again, because hurrying up and wait is something that I got really used to. What it felt like God was trying to teach me, and what God was trying to show me, was perseverance, and is saying, how bad do I really want this? And so I kept asking myself. And every time that I think about that, every time I'd pray about that, I'd go, I really want this bad. And it wasn't because I thought that this would benefit me, but I knew that I wanted to serve my country, and I wanted to serve my sailors especially, and nothing was going to stop me from doing that. And I remember I was sitting in my room, and I was working on an engineering project, and I got an email from the captain that I was working with, and the only subject was all caps, congratulations. And my heart dropped, because I didn't know what was about to say. I was hoping for the best. I was so excited. And I opened that email, and it said, congratulations, we're going to give you a waiver. And I remember I put on my flip-flops, and I ran downstairs to the ROTC office, and I should have been in uniform, but the bad looks I got were quickly wiped away when they found out why I was so excited to be down there. And I remember I got a huge hug from both lieutenants down there, and they were just so excited. They were so pumped up for me. And, I was just so thankful, because what I learned from that was, it really does pay off to persevere. And not in the ways that I thought it was. Of course I had gotten my contract, and I was thankful for that. But the lesson I learned, and what I had instilled in me from that, was I know that I really want this, and I know that I'm here for, in my opinion, the right reasons. But as mentioned before, I have been and I'm still pursuing special warfare, particularly to be a Navy SEAL. And everyone in the unit knew that. And my lieutenant, sophomore year, pulled me aside and said, hey, Chevy, I'm leaving. I'm getting my next duty station. But before we go, I don't want to leave without helping you at least start the process for applying to, it's called SOAS, the SEAL Officer Assessment Selection, which is a session board for all SEAL officer candidates from OCF, Naval Academy, OCS, Naval Academy, ROTC. If you're going to be an officer in the SEAL teams, you have to go through this selection. And he said, hey, you're probably not going to get it. You're a sophomore, and this is only reserved for those going into senior year. But we'll toss your name in the hat. You know how to do it. And at the end of the day, next year, you'll know and be ready for it. I said, hoo-yah, sir, that sounds good. Now, I applied, and the application wasn't too awful. Just had to take the screening test for it and other things, and that was pretty simple. I'd done that many times before. One morning, we were at our morning training on Friday. Lieutenant Grims, he was the one who was helping me, a very strong Christian who I looked up to, and I still look up to very highly. He was mentioning some of the things that our midshipmen had done over the summer, going on cruises and to do phenomenal things in the fleet, those who already commissioned. And he says, and Midshipman Chiaravallotti. And I go, yes, sir. He goes, you're the youngest person, as far as I'm aware, to get into this program. And I hadn't heard that before. And I was so excited, over the moon about it. Well, fast forward a little bit later, 2 days before I was supposed to leave for Coronado, I had packed up my bags. I was out on the porch with my dad every night talking to him about it, since he had worked with SEALs in the Navy. I remember I was going on a hike with my mom, and I got an email from the program manager, and it said, Midshipman Chiaravallotti, unfortunately, we found you disqualified. Medically, we can't take you. And it was 2 days before, and I was absolutely crushed. And this was my dream, and I didn't know what that meant, if it was a permanent disqualification or if I could fight it. Unfortunately, for that summer, I could not, since it was 2 days before I was supposed to leave. But, I thought about it, and I go, I'd worked all my life to be a SEAL. When I knew what SEALs were back in 6th grade even, I knew this is what I wanted to do. So I said, this is nothing different. I need to pursue this. I'm going to keep training for this. 2 weeks later, headed up to the Springs in Pennsylvania, Bedford, PA, to spend a summer R&R week there. And that was God's perfect timing because my friends were so supportive of me there. But I knew I wanted to fight back. So on the way back home, I got the appointment and I got everything scheduled and everything ready to go. And unfortunately, like I said, it was too late for that summer, but I knew that next summer I was going to train again and going to keep applying. Later on that summer, I got injured. And it was unfortunately not in an isolated area. It was my left knee and my left shoulder. And I was like, how does that happen? And because of that, I had to sit out for a while, and I had to do rehabilitation exercises, which were really helpful. And I'm thankful for now, especially because of the fact I know how to strengthen my joints and how to strengthen my knee and my shoulder when they're injured. But in that moment, I was crushed because I was like, I've been working so hard, and here I am in another setback. But I prayed about it some more and was being patient in my rehabilitation process. And because of that, I came out stronger. So I applied again in the next year, and I got approved again to go to SOAS. And I was so excited. And then middle of training, this was during COVID, so it was at home. And we were going through the interview week with the SEALs. And halfway through, I got an email, once again, saying that we found you medically disqualified. And at that point, I was like, I expected that one. I saw that one coming a mile away. But I had everything ready to go. And I submitted all the paperwork. Unfortunately, they believed I was lying. And they didn't believe me or the doctor. And they disqualified me. So I asked myself again, how bad do I want this? Because this is getting a little bit annoying. I prayed about it some more. Then my dad talked to me, and he sat me down, and we just talked about what leadership and what the Navy meant to us. And it was essential for getting me back on track, because that motivated me. It helped me remember the reason why back when I was a freshman that I wanted to be an officer in the first place. How bad did I want it when I was fighting Dodmerb? I still want it just as bad now. And I know that even submariners need good leadership. So I was excited to go out there and try to be that good leader for them. And it was, now I'm still pursuing special warfare. I'm hoping to do a transfer later on. I'm content with where I'm at, and I'm content with being a submariner because I know that this whole journey has been so exciting and so exhilarating, so chaotic. It can't be anything but God's hand. I would not be who I am if my plans worked out, especially with the Navy, and I would never be able to truly appreciate what I have been given. I trust God to mold me more like Christ in each day, and by getting scored on, he is. And according to this, his will is the best way to do it. Similarly, I trust him to make me the best officer I can be. And if being a SEAL is in his will, then even the difficulty in doing a lat transfer from sub to special operations won't stand a chance. Perseverance, to me, takes trust. Not trust in the outcome, but trust that the path is the best one for me. So believe in what you're doing. And to me, pursuing a commission and taking care of my people, I believed in what I was doing, and that was my motivation. In the middle of the night, it's hard to remind yourself to be a Christian when you're at 2 a.m. in the morning, but it's a command. And look at 2 Timothy 6:11, and it says, "But you, man of God, run from these things," talking about unrighteousness and worldly things. And he says, "Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness." I saw myself as being responsible for each one of my 400 kids. That felt like, really. They were under my command, and not due to my own placement, but because God placed me there. I was commanded by God to serve them and to fight the good fight of faith for the faith and for my witness and for my guys. But one of the very difficult things that happened to us was losing 2 classmates in a span of a little more than a year. And it happened in February of 2020, right before we left for permanent COVID vacation, it felt like, from school. And then it also happened again in the spring of my senior year. Unfortunately, with the stressors of life and what was going on, personally, one of my guys in the Corps, he ended up taking his own life. People didn't know him too well, which was a whole different feeling of guilt for many people, including myself. But it hit us hard because that night he went missing. And before we found out that he had taken his own life, all of us, everybody in the Corps, we come out to where we thought he was and we're looking for him. And we were working with the police and the Coast Guard to find our guy. And finally we did, after a night and a half of searching. How do you motivate your guys? And how do you persevere when you have such a weight of guilt and just sadness on your shoulders? The rest of that week, I didn't know what to say. And I was speechless. Being the Corps commander, it was tough because I wanted to keep going and keep fighting for what we believed in. But I was no longer going to do that at the detriment of my people. Unfortunately, because of the Corps, how it was running, we didn't have much going on at the time. And he fights many personal battles. But I was going to make sure that the most important thing, any decision I made, was going to be for the benefit of my guys and the benefit of their well-being. As mentioned before, being able to persevere, I could not have done it without caring for what I was doing and caring for the mission that I had. That's what kept me afloat and kept me focused on what was important, which was my guys.
So you said that there was a second suicide or a second death?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There was a second death. So I lost one classmate in the February of 2020.
Okay.
And then I lost another classmate the end of January of this year.
All right. And both of those were suicides?
Well, the first one, it wasn't unclear what it was. It was an accident,
Sure.
though.
So as you've been talking and as you've given your answer, it's obvious, knowing as well your family history and your upbringing, that faith is obviously a very big thing in your life. Let's sort of integrate those two things a little bit more, this idea of faith and service. Talk about what faith and service have meant to you, and maybe go into a little bit more detail about how you've incorporated those into your desire to lead.
So yeah, faith and service to me is essential to have both of those and to have both of those working in conjunction with each other. Long story short, back when I was at EMS, I was responding to my first code, which is, first time a patient was passing away on my watch. And unfortunately, we did all we could, but we didn't end up saving the patient. The whole time I had been doing CPR, and the whole time that I was actively involved with trying to resuscitate him, I kept hearing this voice in the back of my head from the Holy Spirit telling me to pray. And I go, Holy Spirit, I promise you I'm praying. I've been praying this whole time. Like, what do you mean by this? And then I saw a cross on the wall and a Bible on the bookshelf next to me. And I go, you want me to pray with them? And it all clicked in that moment. I walked up to the mom and the dad in the house, and I told them, I say, ma'am, I'm an EMT, but I would like to pray with you if possible. And I just asked my paramedic who I was working with, who was a very strong agnostic, if I would do that, if I could. And he said, I think that'd be a great idea. In this room full of police and firefighters and, EMTs and paramedics, we grabbed hands, the two parents, and we just prayed. Arms were lifted high, and in that moment, there was grief, and an immense grief and sadness. But they gave me a huge hug, and they just told me, there's so much peace in this moment. So just thank you. And obviously, I could not take credit for that, and I didn't. But ever since then, I'd wondered, okay, I'm here to serve my community as an EMS, but I'm not here to just save physical lives. I'm here to save more than just that. I'm here to save souls. And ever since then, every time I go on a call, every time I would get emergency alert on my phone, I'd be praying, and I'd get my blue pen that I still have with me now, and I'd draw a little cross on my glove on my left palm, and I'd go, all right, God, you have me, in your hand. You have my patient in your hand. Keep us safe. Keep my crew safe. Help us to pick up on the small things. Help us to speak life into this person. And if it's not an emergency, and help us just to be there. And ever since then, that fire to serve, but with the backbone of faith, has been essential to my leadership. And some of the ways I've been able to incorporate that is, as I mentioned before, when you're trying to define something, the Bible is the best way to do it. And when I was writing down the notes to pass down to my successor for the Corps, I said, you know what, I don't have the words for this, but the Bible does. And so I wrote down the topics, and I found verses that matched up. And actually, the first one came when I was at an OCF Bible study, and we were going through John, and it's right when they were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus had just been caught, and they were there. And they just asked him who he was, and he said, in John 18, 8 through 9, Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. And that, in essence, for me, I heard that, and I was like, that's ownership right there. And as a leader and as a service member, you have to have ownership of what you're doing and your job and your role and your people, most importantly. That their well-being is your well-being. How your guys are performing, and in school for me, but also in their trainings or how they are at home, that affects them, and that affects them big time, more than academics, more than a grade show, obviously. And I thought about that and ownership, and I said, Lord, this is perfect. You have given us an example of what it means to be a leader and to be in charge and entrusted to, because God, those men were yours, and those men still are yours. We are all yours. But now I see that these men you've given me are mine. And I'm not going to be a perfect leader, but I'm going to own up to what I'm doing. I'm going to own up to the role that I've been given, and I'm going to perform because how they're doing affects me. How their well-being is important to me. And I am not here to serve my boss. I'm not here to serve the Navy. I am, but in my heart, I'm here to serve my guys that have been entrusted to me. The responsibility of them is given to me, and I am not going to back down from that. And the basis for that is care. The next one, with faith and service, I learned is to know your job. And this one comes from Proverbs, and it's Proverbs 24, verse 5, and it says, a wise man is full of strength, and a man of knowledge enhances his might. And I thought about that, and I go, wow, that's incredible. Knowledge by itself is like a mighty sword. It strengthens a warrior, it strengthens a leader. Because if you don't know the job, then you can't properly lead. And a big part for that, for me, was when I was the Corps commander, and I was in charge of a maritime academy for producing licensed cadets to be in the merchant marine fleet. However, I'm not a merchant marine. I'm not a licensed cadet. I was an ocean engineer and just there for ROTC. So I didn't feel comfortable making decisions for my guys because I didn't know their whole world. I didn't know the rules they had to follow. I didn't know, all the regulations and all of the things they had to do in order to get their license. So I spent that summer learning and trying to understand them better because I wasn't going to make decisions about their watch on their ship or their classes because I didn't know what I was talking about. But when I got the knowledge, I felt so much more equipped and prepared to make those decisions for them. So knowing your job, I think, is essential. And that comes straight from the Bible as well in Proverbs 24. The next thing I'd say is don't be a product of your environment. And that comes from Psalm 27, verse 3. And it's, though an army besieges me, my heart will not fear. Though war breaks out against me, even then I will be confident. And, being in the Navy, I think about that. Like, imagine being surrounded by an army. You're besieged. There's no help coming in. Like, this is it. But in that moment, David says, I'm not afraid. I'm at war right now, but I'm confident because I know that the one who writes the script loves me, and he loves all those out there, but he's going to take care of all of us. And this is all in his will. So I thought about that and I go, sometimes I very much feel like I am at war, especially in the Corps, with leadership and in school, especially. I was at war with school, and I did not feel like being confident because I wasn't. But in those moments, in those times, I couldn't let that get to me. And that was because I knew that my guys needed me. And I knew that my people, although they may not see the battle that I'm going through, they were not going to face the brunt of it. And I was not going to let that happen. So that's the next thing I'd say, don't be a product of your environment. The next thing, and this is really, really important for Christians, is let your character speak for yourself. And this comes from Daniel 6:4. Right after he had been raised to a higher level in the government, it says, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. And these guys were making up stuff, and they were trying to take Daniel down, but they couldn't because Daniel's character spoke for itself, and that protected him, and he made him blameless. Nobody could, hold a fire to him, because even when he did make mistakes, and he absolutely did, it's not recorded, but he did, he would own them, and that's what we're called to do, is whenever we make mistakes, whenever we're in a situation where maybe we make the wrong call, our character needs to speak for itself, and we need to go, hey, that's our fault. We screwed up, and I own that, and I'm going to work on being better, and I'm going to work on next time in a situation like this, I will make the right call. And that saved me many times, because when you're running a Corps of Cadets, not everyone wants to be there. And when you're running, a division in the Navy or a platoon in whatever branch you are in, not everyone is going to want to be there and participate. And unfortunately, what that means sometimes is when you make a decision, they're going to try to drag your name through the dirt. But if you surround yourself with godliness, and as mentioned before in Timothy, pursue all of those beautiful things that set apart Christians, that set apart us as the city on the hill, then those who see our characters will go, maybe he didn't make the right call this time. Maybe he screwed up, but that's okay, because I trust that he cares about me and that he's not in it for himself, or he or she, is not in it for themselves. A big verse that I love to go to about this is, 1 Timothy 4:16. And the reason why I love that one so much is because the letter to Timothy is incredible for perseverance and leadership. And the reason for that is, when I scroll to this verse, is when reading through this, it says, pay close attention to your life and your teaching. Persevere in these things, for by doing this, you will save both yourself and your hearers. That by itself, your character, your care for your people, that will make sure that your guys and your gals, wherever you are, and your children maybe even, by pursuing that, you're looking out for the best in them. The last two lessons I had that I learned, the big themes at least, were one is being stable in all your ways. And that comes from James 1:8. And that is super essential for leaders, because it says, the verse is, such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. And when you're unstable as a leader, no one can trust you. And not that they can't trust your judgment, but they can't trust your decisions right now, because what you're doing is showing that you're not consistent. And when the going gets tough, are you going to make the right call? So being able to be stable, and as mentioned before, not letting yourself be a product of your environment, by doing all of those things, you're going to protect your leadership, and you're going to protect your guys especially by being firmly planted in the Word of God, and also in the doctrine of the branch that you're in or the role that you're filling out. And finally, the most important lesson besides ownership that I'd say I'd pass on to someone by being in the faith and service here is resting. In Mark 2:27, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The reason for this is, God is smart, and we know that God's smart, and that's kind of a given. But when God made the commandment for the Sabbath, he didn't make it because the Sabbath needed to be holy. He did it because the Israelites and us as Christians are going to be stressed out with life, with work, with all that's going on in our heads, in our families. And if we're not taking time to rest and to recuperate and to recharge ourselves and be in the Word and be with Christ, then we are not going to be effective leaders, and we're not going to be effective Christians. So the biggest thing I'd say to somebody who's pursuing leadership and pursuing whatever role they're in is to find time to rest. Maybe you take a day out of the week and make sure that's a restful day for you, and you don't look at your phone or you have it on Do Not Disturb or whatever it might be, but rest. And make sure your guys are resting too, because I made sure as an effort to never text on the weekends if I didn't have to, since I knew that if I was working, they'd be working. And I might be working, but I don't want them to do that because they need their rest as well. Because of that, the morale went up a little bit. Every Sunday night we get to the meeting and no one would want to be there, but we would make sure it was worthwhile and that they enjoyed their time with their families, wherever they were at. So rest, seriously rest, and enjoy your time away, and make sure your guys do the same.
So you said these are some notes or lessons that you handed down to your successor. I don't remember if successor was exactly the word that you used, but it's the one I'm going to go with. How did they react to that? Were they also a believer?
They were. Not necessarily, at least to me. He never talked about his faith too much. But I do know that these lessons, we talked about him. One of the things that I told him when he was chosen was, what I looked for in the person to replace me was a care. It wasn't just a care for what you're doing, but a care for your people. And as I've talked about many times today, because if you care, you are going to do the job to the best of your ability. And he heard that one, and all these lessons after that, we talked about him and we discussed them. It made sense. I've been in touch with him and he's doing well.
Yeah. So you said you've been chatting, or you've had a couple of conversations with him about those notes. Certainly, I don't want you to give away anything that maybe was discussed in confidentiality, but kind of give me a general sense, though. Did you find that there are ones that he wanted to talk with you about more, or he wrestled with or pushed back against?
Yeah, the one that really spoke to him was the letting your character speak for yourself one. Because in the Corps of Cadets here, not everyone wants to be a part of it. And because of that, people were trying to drag his name through the dirt a little bit. The biggest thing I told him, and he was like, Chevy, these aren't true. I don't know how to fight them. And I go, his name's Cole. I said, Cole, your character, who you are, matters. And people see that. And what happened to me many times, is I had friends tell me this, is someone would go up to me and say, Chevy, this person said this rumor about you. And before I could even dismiss it, before I could say anything, this person would go, and I knew it was fake, and I knew it wasn't true, because he would never do that. And Cole, now in the situation that I was in, I told him that story, he goes, Chevy, this is incredible, this works. Like, it's as simple as being a good person, because guys will know you care for them. And then whenever situations do arrive, they'll know your heart. And if you make a wrong decision, they at least trust that their well-being is what you're looking out for.
Yeah, so you've really shared a lot of good stuff today in this conversation. And if listeners were going to take away only one thing from our conversation, what would you hope it would be?
The one thing I'd say, all my rambling today would be about is perseverance is built on your why. If you think about it, why do we persevere as a Christian? Why do we do that? We look at the Bible and those who are in the Bible and those in the New Testament, and it says that we are awaiting a glory that we could never, ever imagine. And we can't even understand it with our current bodies. But we are pursuing godliness, and we are pursuing to be like Christ and to be Christ's love to others around us. And if you don't have a why, if you don't understand that that is the reason, then whenever the going gets tough, then you're not going to want to do it anymore, because you're not going to see the purpose in it. It's easy to be a strong Christian on a Friday afternoon after work. Maybe you're tired still, but you're home, the week is done, and you are ready to relax. On a Tuesday morning at 4:00, you're getting up for PT, you're getting up for duty, and you had just spent the whole night, maybe even talking to one of your guys who really was going through a rough time. Why are you still there? And the reason is because that person trusted you enough, because your character spoke for itself enough, so that person relied on you and depended on you in their moment of need. So when you have a why, when you have a care for what you're doing, you will not do it without giving it your all.
OCF Crosspoint is a production of Officers Christian Fellowship. For more information about OCF, check us out online at ocfusa.org or find us on Facebook and Instagram at OCFUSA. This episode was hosted and produced by me, Josh Jackson. Audio cleanup and repair was done by Michael Jerry of Mighty Productions. If you have an idea for a guest, topic, or story that you think should be considered on a future episode, send an email to podcast@ocfusa.org. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us for the next episode of OCF Crosspoint.